Hi everyone! Our topic this week is distribution strategies. So we're starting our discussion of the place P. This week we're talking about physical distribution, the distribution of physical goods rather than services. We will touch on inventory control. We'll talk about general distribution strategies that organizations take. And then next week we will look at specific questions related to online distribution, related to retailing, what we do at this individual store level, and also related to the distribution of services. And the distribution P, like all of the other Ps, or the place P, links to all of the other marketing mix elements. So keep in mind that your decisions that you make with your other marketing mix elements, the other three Ps, will affect your place P. For example, if you have certain pricing objectives, that might eliminate your ability to do certain distribution decisions. If you have a certain product size or features, that also might influence your distribution decisions, and vice versa. If you make certain promises to your customers related to distribution, that could affect your price, for example. So always keep that in mind. Now, like I always say, this is an introductory course. So we are just looking at a very broad view of distribution, but this is a whole area of marketing. In fact, one of my dear professors back at USF, his entire area of specialization was logistics and distribution. It's a very broad and rich area that you can really go deeply in, but we're just getting a taste of it here. Before we start, I want to address one thing. In kind of everyday life, or even sometimes in business, we talk about supply chain and distribution channels interchangeably, and I want to make the difference between them clear. Distribution channels are the businesses, the entities that make up the trail through which a good or a service passes between the point where it's manufactured and the point where it reaches the consumer. So from the factory, usually in the case of a good, to the consumer. So maybe from the manufacturer to the wholesaler to the retailer to the customer. Whereas the supply chain is broader. It includes the step where we procured the raw materials themselves all the way to the consumer, and it not only includes the entities themselves like the businesses, but it also includes all of the procedures and the processes. So it's a subtle difference, but there is a difference between the two terms, although in everyday life sometimes we do use them interchangeably. Okay, so what is a channel of distribution? I just defined it informally. It's the series of firms or individuals that facilitates the movement of a product to the final consumer or to the final customer, because it might be a business-to-business customer. A channel of distribution can be direct, meaning the product goes from the producer straight to the customer, or it could be an indirect channel, meaning there are some other steps between the producer and the customer. The shortest indirect channel will have one more entity between the producer and a customer. So in the example here, we see that we have a retailer between the producer and the customer, and that would be the shortest possible indirect channel that we could have. Now, you have many different possible types of channels of distribution. They differ by the number of members that are going to be participating. So, for example, you might have a direct channel like the one we just discussed. You might have a very short indirect channel with just the producer, retailer, and then the customer. Or you might also have a wholesaler in there. You might have several different wholesalers. And these things just depend on the size of your market, and whether intermediaries are available, whether you have straight access to the customers or not, and other different considerations. Now, of course, some producers use several different types of channels. So, for example, Nike has stores where it sells direct to the customers, but they also sell to retailers like Dick's Sporting Goods, for example, who then sell to the customer. Distribution channels create time, place, and ownership utility. Remember, way back at the beginning of the semester, we discussed the different types of utility that marketing offers. And for this particular P, the place P, it creates value by making the product available when the customer wants it, where the customer wants it, and also by making it possible for the customer to take possession of the product. And remember that it's important to keep these things in mind so that we can be intentional about our marketing decisions, so that we can know exactly how we're adding value to our customers. Okay, so to go a little bit more deeply in terms of how distribution channels add value, let's look at distribution channel functions. Distribution channels break bulk. That means that as marketers, when we engage in distributing to our customers or through intermediaries, we take large quantities of goods from producers, but then we sell them only a few at a time. So if we didn't have breaking bulk, each consumer would have to deal with purchasing a huge amount directly from the producer and then dealing with it, freezing it, getting into a group with several friends and buying together, whatever it takes. Creating assortments. Distribution channels allow the consumer to go to just one store and find a variety of products, sometimes of completely unrelated products. Imagine the variety that you find when you walk into a place like Target, for example. Transportation and storage. We're able to get products through distribution channels that are manufactured from all over the country and all over the world. Facilitating functions. Things like offering credit to buyers. As marketers, through our distribution channels, we are able to offer buyers things like credit or anything else that makes the purchase process or the acquisition of the goods easier. Risk-taking. So especially for retailers, this applies. You take the loss when you buy a product from a manufacturer if it turns out that it's not such a great product, or people don't like it, or it's not the quality that you expected. The retailer is usually the entity that takes on the risk, because consumers don't have to buy the product in huge quantities. They have the option of returning it, and so on and so forth. And then finally, communication and transaction. Channel members perform all kinds of functions, both for the consumer and for the manufacturer. They serve as a true intermediary. They serve as the link between the beginning of the channel and the end of the channel, and there's huge value in that. Okay, another aspect of distribution channels that I wanted to touch on are vertical marketing systems, and that is just a fancy way of referring to another expression you may have heard of, which is vertical integration. And that is when you have formal or sometimes informal cooperation between members of the distribution channel. So it means that there is some kind of agreement between channel members where they work together to make things more efficient. Sometimes it can be an administered VMS, just meaning that there is a dominant channel member that kind of becomes the boss of everyone else informally. When Walmart or Walmart Corporation is part of a distribution channel, as a retailer, usually as a retailer, though you could argue that Sam's Club can act as a wholesaler as well, Usually they are the dominant channel member and everyone else listens to them. A corporate VMS is when you have one firm that actually officially owns the different steps of the manufacturing process. So if you have heard of the company Luxottica, that owns Ray-Ban, and it owns many different manufacturing, retailing, wholesaling entities related to eyeglasses. They are probably the classic example of a corporate VMS. They also own lens crafters. They own some of the places where we can source raw materials. Classic example. And then a contractual VMS is when you have separate ownership, but through contracts, through official agreements, the channel members cooperate. So franchising is one form of contractual VMS. A lot of fast food restaurants have contractual VMS setup. Okay, another really important decision to look at in distribution channels is whether our distribution is going to be intensive, exclusive, or selective. In intensive distribution, we want to get our product into as many retailers as we possibly can. Something like Coke or like Wrigley's gum or, consumer products like that. They want to be in every possible outlet, at every possible retailer, around every corner. Exclusive distribution is the other extreme. It's when, usually for prestige reasons, you don't want to be everywhere. You want to be found in very specific outlets, probably only one per region. Think Rolex, think BMW. You want to be hard to find. You want people to work a little bit to be able to get you, and that's part of your exclusivity. Selective distribution is somewhere in between. It's right in between intensive and exclusive distribution. Okay, another important consideration for the place P or distribution is inventory control. These are all of the activities that help ensure that goods are available when we want them. The key thing with inventory control is that we never want to have too many goods available, too much of a quantity, but we also don't want to run out. We want to have a balance between having excess inventory and between stockouts. And think about it. If you have too much inventory, you're wasting warehouse space. You're not managing your cash flow well because you're buying too much product at once. But at the same time, if you have too little inventory, you're losing selling opportunities because your customer will come to you hoping to find a product, and if they don't find it, they'll walk away frustrated and you will have lost a sales opportunity. So you want to strike that balance. What channel intermediaries and retailers hope to achieve is just-in-time inventory, which is having such good analytics and such good systems that inventory can come in just as it's needed to be sold. So they're never carrying too much, and yet they're never selling out. Okay, and then finally, new directions in distribution. So exciting. Anyone who thinks that the only exciting areas in marketing are social media or advertising or the very visible things is wrong. In the place P in distribution, there are so many interesting and new things happening. For example, right now, a lot of warehouses are using radio frequency identification or RFID. And that is a system of keeping track of inventory that is much more sophisticated than using barcodes, for example. It has a much higher range, sometimes can be up to hundreds of feet. You don't need that very specific visual scanning like you do for barcodes, and it's interference is not as much of an issue, and it just helps you keep track of where everything is. So imagine if you're in a warehouse and you can know exactly where every can of beans is at any given time, and how many cans have left the warehouse and how many have come in, without having to scan every individual one. And then, of course, there's the things that Amazon is doing with its Amazon Go stores and their Just Walk Out technology. So they are using technologies similar to what's found in self-driving cars, things like computer vision, deep learning technologies, facial recognition, and recognition of other biometrics, along with their Amazon Prime data for users, so that essentially the experience is you can walk into a store, grab what you need, walk out. You don't have to scan anything, nothing. They're testing it out in Seattle. I think it's going fairly well so far. Of course, people, you have both sides. Some people love it. Some people say it raises questions about privacy issues and a whole host of other questions. So think about it. Try to think about how you feel about it. And then finally, reverse logistics. This is a whole new area that I'm excited about. These are all of the logistics related to what do we do with a product after it's reached its final destination, after the consumer has gotten it and used it and now wants to get rid of it. What do we do? What are the distribution channels used for recycling or for reusing a product or for taking it to be resold elsewhere? There are now companies popping up that are specialized in taking goods and then taking them apart and reselling them for recycling and reuse, for example. And that is also an exciting area, especially as people become more aware of how can we be more environmental and take better care of the earth. So lots of exciting areas. Let's continue the discussion with some other questions on the discussion forum. Thanks, everyone.